It was past midnight when the scream shattered the night. It was an agonizing wail, something that didn't belong to any living creature. Emma Johnson froze in her bed, her heart racing as the sound echoed through the old house. The darkness around her felt thicker now, almost tangible, wrapping itself around her chest. She tried to tell herself it was just the wind, but she knew better. She had lived in this house long enough to understand its creaks and groans. This was something different. A cold draft seeped in from the cracks in the window, making her shiver. The quiet of the house that once felt comforting now felt oppressive. Every shadow in the room seemed to grow longer, more sinister. She lay there, unmoving, too afraid to even blink, fearing that any movement might make her the next target of whatever had made that sound. She didn't want to know what it was, she just wanted it to stop. But the house wouldn't let her ignore it. The silence that followed the scream wasn't peaceful. It was ominous, as if it was waiting for something to happen. Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, trying to dial the number for help. But before she could hit the first number, the air shifted again. She could feel the presence close, too close. The door creaked softly. Something was watching her. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen, staring at the door. The whisper, that soft, eerie sound, had reached her ears again. She couldn't tell where it was coming from, but she knew it wasn't her imagination. It was real. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as the door creaked open a little more, a faint draft slipping into the room. Her mind raced. Should she run? Should she call for help? But no one would be here for hours. The silence that had followed the scream now felt even more oppressive. There was something lurking just beyond the door. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, but the air around her felt thick, too thick to move easily. Every step felt like wading through a sea of dread. The house seemed to grow colder with every passing second. The darkness outside the room stretched like an endless void. Emma tightened her grip on the flashlight, but it felt like a futile gesture. She wasn't sure if it would even protect her. Yet, she had no choice but to face whatever was on the other side. Emma's breath quickened as she moved closer to the door, her body tense, her every instinct screaming at her to turn and run. But she couldn't. Something was forcing her to stay. It was as if the house itself was holding her captive. She could feel the air growing colder with every step, the temperature dropping so sharply it felt like ice was creeping into her veins. The faint whisper came again, but this time it sounded clearer, almost like a voice. A voice she recognized, but she couldn't place it. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she reached the door. She hesitated, her fingers brushing against the cold wood. The door was almost entirely ajar now, the gap large enough for her to see into the dark hallway beyond. She was standing on the threshold, her foot halfway into the hallway, when the floorboards creaked. A sudden jolt of panic surged through her. Something was moving in the dark. She felt it before she heard it. A soft shuffle, followed by a low groan, as though someone or something was crawling just out of sight. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. This was insane. There had to be an explanation. But the fear was overwhelming. The house was no longer just a place. It had become a living, breathing entity, and it was drawing her in, inch by inch. The darkness in the hallway felt alive, pulsating with a presence that was far from human. Emma swallowed, forcing her legs to move as she stepped into the hallway, the air pressing against her like a wall. Her flashlight cut through the blackness, revealing only a narrow, dim corridor. The floorboards creaked under her weight, every step a loud echo in the silence. It felt like the house was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere in the distance, she heard it. A whisper, low and guttural. Something unintelligible, but so close, it sent a shiver down her spine. She turned towards the sound, and her flashlight flickered. Her pulse quickened. The light flickered again, dimming, before the beam returned to full strength. It wasn't just her imagination. Something was moving. She could see the faintest outline of something, or someone, moving just at the edge of her vision, just beyond the beam of light. Panic gripped her chest. The figure was tall, lanky, its shape undefined. She stepped back, her mind racing. Was this a person? Or something else? She couldn't even be sure if it was human anymore. The silence between them felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Emma's body shook as she tried to gather the courage to move forward, but something in the back of her mind told her to turn around and run. But it was too late. The figure stepped forward, and the light flickered again, plunging her into darkness. The moment the figure moved, Emma's instincts took over. She dashed backward, but the flashlight slipped from her hand, clattering loudly against the floor. The sound echoed through the empty house like a death knell. She gasped, her breath caught in her throat. The room was plunged into darkness. She tried to reach for the flashlight, but the cold floor felt too slippery, too alien. The figure was moving closer now, its shape no longer a shadow but something tangible, something that seemed to suck in all the light around it. Emma's heart raced, her skin crawling. She knew, deep down, that whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a figment of her imagination. It was real, and it was coming for her. Panic surged as she stumbled backward, eyes frantically searching for a way out. But the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. There was no escape. Her mind raced, searching for something, anything, that could save her. She glanced around, but everything seemed wrong. The walls were closer now, the air thicker. The figure was so close now, just a few feet away. Emma could hear its breath, ragged and deep. But it wasn't her own. She froze. Whatever it was breathing, waiting. The following days were a blur for Emma Johnson. The terror she had felt in the hallway lingered like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over everything she did. It was impossible to ignore. Her mind wouldn't let her forget the figure, the whisper, the icy presence. She tried to go about her daily routine, make coffee, check her emails, but the house felt different now. It felt wrong. Each creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind felt like a warning. Her thoughts were clouded by fear, and her sense of reality began to crack. Emma spent hours pacing, trying to make sense of what had happened, but the memories were fragmented, slipping through her fingers like sand. No one had been around when it happened. Her phone had no messages, her emails were normal. She had called her friend Megan, but all she could offer was reassurance. "It's just a bad dream," Megan said. But Emma knew the truth. What she had felt, what she had seen, was not a dream. Something in the house was watching her, waiting for her to slip, to break. Her exhaustion made her paranoid. Every night since, she would hear noises from the crawl space, scraping sounds that seemed deliberate, like something, or someone, was trying to get in. She had checked the locks, double-checked the windows, but the feeling of being watched never went away. The fear had taken root, and she knew it would only grow stronger. The next night, Emma couldn't take it anymore. She had to know what was causing the sounds. She had tried to avoid it, but the creeping paranoia had become unbearable. She couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, and the nightmares made everything worse. At 2:00 a.m., she found herself standing in front of the crawl space door, the one she had avoided for so long. Her hand hovered over the cold metal handle, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. The sound of scraping was louder tonight. It was almost rhythmic, like something, or someone, was digging through the walls. Emma's stomach turned, but she refused to let fear control her any longer. She yanked the door open. The darkness inside the crawl space was thick, suffocating. The flashlight in her hand flickered as she stepped inside, the beam casting an eerie glow across the space. The air was damp, cold, and musty, and the floor beneath her feet creaked as she moved forward. Every step she took felt heavier, like the house itself was pushing back against her. She stopped, listening. The scraping had stopped, but the silence that followed felt worse. Then she heard something else, a faint, whispering voice just behind her. Emma spun around, but the flashlight revealed nothing. She was alone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from the darkness. Inside the crawl space, Emma's flashlight flickered again, casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. The air was musty, filled with the smell of old wood and damp earth. She stepped carefully over the uneven ground, her shoes scraping against the rough floor. The space was smaller than she had imagined, low ceilings and beams that felt like they were closing in on her. The silence was thick, oppressive. She moved deeper into the crawl space, the beam of the flashlight sweeping over old boxes, forgotten tools, and strange stains on the floor. The whispering came again, soft and distant, but it was unmistakable. Emma froze, her heartbeat quickening. She couldn't tell where it was coming from. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the suffocating feeling grew stronger. The floor creaked again, but this time it was louder, as though something was moving underneath it. Emma turned toward the sound, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, everything was still. And then the scraping resumed. But this time, it wasn't just a sound. It felt like something was dragging itself across the floor, coming closer, slowly, relentlessly. Emma's hands trembled as she raised the flashlight. The beam shook, but when she swept it across the room, there was nothing. Nothing but shadows. Emma's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. She had to get out of there. The crawl space felt like a tomb, the walls closing in, the air growing thicker with every passing second. She turned to leave, but the exit was farther away than she remembered. Panic surged through her as she tried to move toward the door, but the floor seemed to give way beneath her. The scraping sound was louder now, coming from all directions. She could feel the ground beneath her shift, as if something was moving beneath the surface. Emma's breath quickened, her chest tightening with fear. She had to leave. But just as she turned back to the door, a loud crash echoed behind her. She whipped around, the flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam of light landed on something horrific. A figure, pale, twisted, and covered in dirt, crawled out of the shadows. Its face was distorted, its eyes hollow, but it was real, and it was moving toward her. Emma screamed, her heart pounding as she scrambled toward the door. But it felt as though the crawl space was never ending, the walls stretching out before her, blocking her escape. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't hide. Emma's vision blurred as she stumbled, her legs giving out beneath her. The figure was getting closer, its twisted body moving unnaturally fast, dragging itself across the floor with a terrifying speed. She had to make it out. She had to survive. But every time she moved, the crawl space seemed to expand, pushing her farther from the exit. Her breath was shallow, her body trembling with exhaustion. She could hear the figure's labored breath behind her, feel the heat of its presence just inches from her. Emma reached out, her fingers grazing the door handle, but before she could open it, a cold hand shot out, grabbing her ankle. She screamed, kicking and scrambling, but the grip tightened, pulling her back into the darkness. The fear was suffocating now, every inch of her body screaming to escape. The thing was close, too close, and she realized, with growing horror, that it wasn't just after her. It was after her soul. Emma's world spun as she fought, her body failing her. Days passed, but the air in Emma Johnson's home grew heavier with each passing moment. The strange events which she had hoped were a figment of her imagination continued to intensify. The sounds from the crawl space never ceased. At night, they were louder, as if the very walls of her house were alive. Every time she entered the kitchen, she could feel the temperature drop, her breath visible in the air. She kept all the lights on, but it didn't help. It wasn't just the noises anymore. It was the feeling of being watched. There were things that weren't there, at least not in the way they should have been. She would leave an object in one place, and moments later, it would be in another. The subtle disturbances were enough to push her into a state of constant vigilance. She tried reaching out to Megan again, but her friend had been distant, offering hollow reassurances that made Emma feel even more isolated. She had even contacted a local paranormal investigator, but when they came to check the house, they found nothing. No evidence. Just an empty house, with a frightened woman desperate to find an answer. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was feeding off her fear. The more she tried to leave, the more the house seemed to pull her back. She was trapped, and she was beginning to suspect that she might never escape. Every shadow seemed to whisper her name. Every creak in the floor seemed deliberate, like someone, or something, was just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. It was the third night after the investigator had left that Emma woke to a strange sound coming from the attic. A thumping noise, rhythmic and deliberate, as if someone was pacing. It was impossible to ignore. Her heart pounded as she lay frozen in bed, listening. The old house creaked and groaned, but this was different. This sound was deliberate. As the thumping continued, it grew louder, then suddenly stopped. Emma, too terrified to move, kept her eyes fixed on the ceiling above her. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with an almost suffocating tension. It was then that she heard it, a soft voice, barely a whisper, calling her name from the attic. "Emma, come up." The voice was barely audible, but it was unmistakable. It sounded like her mother. She hadn't heard her mother's voice in years. Her mother had passed when Emma was just a teenager. But the voice was so familiar, so clear, that it cut through the fear and drove Emma to the edge of madness. She was too scared to move, but she knew she had to investigate. The attic was just above her room. She grabbed the flashlight from her nightstand, her hands shaking uncontrollably. As she got out of bed, the thumping resumed, louder this time, like something, or someone, was coming closer. The question wasn't whether she could handle it. It was whether she could escape before it was too late. Emma stood at the base of the attic stairs, flashlight in hand, her heart racing. The wooden steps creaked under her feet as she climbed slowly, carefully, each step a reminder of how much she dreaded what was waiting for her at the top. The thumping had stopped, but the silence in the house was deafening. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her, threatening to suffocate her. When she reached the top of the stairs, the door to the attic was ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through. She pushed the door open, the hinges groaning with a sound that matched the fear coursing through her veins. The attic was cold and musty, the floor covered in dust. The flashlight beams sliced through the darkness, revealing old boxes, forgotten furniture, and cobwebs that had long since settled into every corner. But there was something else. A figure standing still in the far corner of the attic, just beyond the reach of the light. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She could barely make out the shape, but the silhouette was unmistakable. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and standing completely still. Emma's heartbeat thudded in her ears as she stepped forward. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. No response. She took another step, then another, until she was standing just feet away from the figure. The light revealed a face, pale and distorted, a grotesque mask of what once might have been human. Her mother's face, twisted and decayed, stared back at her with hollow eyes. Emma stumbled backward, her legs giving out beneath her. Her mind was reeling, her body shaking uncontrollably as the figure in front of her moved. It was her mother's face, but it wasn't her mother. It couldn't be. This thing in the attic, had the same eyes, the same hollow gaze, but everything else was wrong. The smile that spread across the figure's face was unnatural, too wide, too grotesque. "I've been waiting for you," it whispered, its voice eerily familiar, but distorted like a broken record. Emma backed up against the wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She didn't know what to do. Should she run? Should she scream? But her legs wouldn't move. She was paralyzed, trapped in the attic with a creature that resembled the one person she had loved more than anything. The thing took a slow step forward, the sound of its movement loud and deliberate in the silence. Every step it took seemed to send a wave of terror through Emma's body. The creature's hand reached out, its long, bony fingers curling into the air. "It's not over," it hissed. "It's only just beginning." With a final panic scream, Emma bolted from the attic, her body moving on pure instinct. She had to get out of there, had to escape. The figure's laughter echoed in her ears as she stumbled down the stairs, almost tripping over her own feet. Her heart pounded, every beat a reminder of the terror she had just witnessed. The house seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in on her as she ran down the hallway. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away from the attic, from the thing that had taken the face of her mother. She reached the door, but as her hand touched the handle, the house seemed to groan, the door refusing to budge. The cold air inside the house was stifling, oppressive, and she could feel the walls closing in around her. The figure was there again, standing in the doorway, its twisted form blocking her escape. "You can't leave," it hissed. "You belong to us now." Emma's breath caught in her throat. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. She was trapped, and the house was her prison. The darkness around her deepened, swallowing her whole. Emma's breathing was shallow as she stood frozen in the hallway, the figure still blocking her way. It had her mother's face, yet it was a twisted, decayed version. An empty shell, something far worse than death. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all, but the only thought that echoed in her head was the phrase, "You belong to us now." A sickening chill ran down her spine as the creature's form flickered in the dim light, its body distorting, growing larger, more monstrous. Who are you?" Emma's voice cracked, barely a whisper. The figure tilted its head, an eerie smile curling on its lips. "I am what's left," it whispered, its voice like gravel scraping against bone. "I am the part of her that never died, the thing that has always been here." Emma's pulse quickened. The terror of what was happening surged, her vision blurring with disbelief and panic. "What do you want from me?" she gasped, but the figure remained silent, its eyes growing darker. It moved closer, its long skeletal fingers reaching out toward her. "You cannot leave," it murmured, its voice both soothing and menacing. "You are one of us now, Emma." The words sank deep into her chest, suffocating her. The house, the figure, it all seemed connected, an ancient, malevolent force that was now claiming her. In that moment of paralyzing fear, Emma did the only thing she could. She ran. Her legs felt like lead, and every step was an effort to push through the suffocating weight of the air in the house. The figure's laughter echoed behind her, a cruel reminder that she couldn't escape. It wasn't just in the house anymore, it was in her mind, in her very soul. She stumbled down the hallway, trying to reach the front door, but the house seemed to grow darker, its walls closing in with every passing second. The air felt thick, almost like it was pushing against her, holding her back. She reached the door, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the handle. But it wouldn't open. The door was locked. Impossible, she thought. She had left it open just a few minutes ago. Panic surged through her as the sound of heavy footsteps approached. She turned, but there was nothing there. She knew, though, that something was coming, something that wouldn't stop until it had claimed her. The whispers began again, growing louder, filling her mind with voices she couldn't place. They were all calling her name. Emma's legs buckled as she collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. There was nowhere to go. The thing had already won. Her hands shook as she stumbled backward, heart hammering in her chest. The door wouldn't budge. She turned around, her eyes frantic as she searched for another way out. But the walls of the house seemed to be closing in on her, each one more suffocating than the last. "Why won't you let me go?" she shouted, her voice raw with desperation. From behind her, the soft scrape of nails on wood filled the silence, growing louder, more insistent. She spun around, only to face the same twisted figure, her mother's face, now fully morphed into something monstrous. The figure's grin stretched impossibly wide, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You can't leave, Emma," it said, its voice echoing with a distorted, almost hypnotic quality. "You've always belonged here." A sense of cold dread settled in her stomach. "What do you want from me?" Emma pleaded, her body shaking with terror. The figure's hands reached out toward her, the long skeletal fingers curling in a slow, deliberate motion. Emma could feel the air grow colder, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The house was not just a place. It was a living entity, and it wanted her to stay, to become part of it forever. "You belong to the house now," it whispered, its voice like a rustling wind, cold and unforgiving. There was no escape. Emma's chest tightened as the figure in front of her reached out with its long, skeletal fingers, brushing against her cheek with a coldness that sent a shock through her entire body. The voice returned, low and haunting. "You are mine now," it whispered. She could feel the weight of its words settle in her mind like a dark cloud. "You will stay with me forever." Emma tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't move. It felt like the house had a hold on her, like its very walls were trapping her in place. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she stared at the creature, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and disbelief. The memories of her mother, her kind, loving face, had been replaced by this thing, this monster. "No," Emma managed to whisper, the word barely audible. "Please, let me go." But the figure only smiled wider, its mouth stretching unnaturally as it leaned in closer. "You will never leave, not alive." The air around her grew heavier, suffocating her as if the house itself was tightening its grip, pulling her into its dark embrace. The world around Emma began to blur, the edges of reality fraying as the figure moved closer. She could feel the darkness creeping into her mind, clouding her thoughts, erasing her sense of self. "You're becoming part of this place," the figure whispered, its voice soothing, yet terrifying. "The house calls to you. It always has." Emma's legs finally gave way, her body crumpling to the floor as she fought to stay conscious. The walls seemed to spin, the house itself warping and distorting around her. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the figure loomed over her, its form looming larger with every passing second. "You belong to me now," it said again, its voice growing louder, more insistent. Emma wanted to scream, to fight, but the house seemed to silence her, suffocating her will to resist. The floor beneath her felt soft, like the earth itself was swallowing her whole. The figure reached down, its fingers curling around her wrist, pulling her closer. She could feel herself slipping, losing control, losing everything she had once been. Emma's mind raced as the house seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, its walls alive, watching her, waiting. The figure had pulled her into its grasp, but something inside her stirred, something primal, desperate to survive. The creature's grip was cold, its fingers digging into her wrist with unnatural strength. "Let me go," she screamed, her voice breaking. But it only laughed, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through her bones. She could feel herself slipping, losing control, but then in the darkness of her fear, something flickered. A memory. Her mother's face. Not the twisted version that haunted her now, but the woman who had raised her loved her. Emma's mother had always taught her to be strong, to fight for what was right. The strength that had once been in her mother now flowed through Emma, igniting a fire within her. With every ounce of willpower, she yanked her arm free from the figure's grasp. The house groaned, as if in protest, but Emma wouldn't stop. She ran, each step feeling heavier, but each one taking her closer to the door, to freedom, to life. The figure's voice echoed behind her, louder this time, filled with rage. "You can't escape. You're mine now." But Emma was no longer afraid. She reached the door, her hand gripping the handle with everything she had. The door slammed open. With the door wide open, Emma's heart pounded as she sprinted down the dark, empty street. The wind howled, whipping through the trees, but she didn't care. She was free, or at least she thought she was. As her feet pounded the pavement, she could still hear the figure's voice echoing in her ears, still feel its presence hovering at the edge of her mind. "You can't run," it whispered, sending a chill through her spine. She glanced behind her, half expecting to see it, but the street was empty. The silence was deafening, like the world had stopped for just a moment. She didn't know where she was going, just that she had to keep moving. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her legs felt like they might give out, but she kept running. Her mind was a blur of thoughts, fear, confusion, and the hope that she could escape this nightmare. But something wasn't right. The street seemed to stretch on forever. She should have reached the end by now. But the street was endless, looping back on itself. The horror she had tried to outrun was still there, clinging to her, pulling her back. Emma collapsed to her knees, the weight of exhaustion and terror overwhelming her. She had been running for what felt like hours, but the street never seemed to end. It twisted, turned, and looped in on itself, as if mocking her attempts to escape. "No!" she gasped, shaking her head. "This can't be happening." Her breath was ragged, her body trembling with fear and fatigue. She tried to get up, but her legs refused to obey. The shadows around her seemed to move, the wind whispering in her ears, pulling her into the darkness. "Help me," she muttered, her voice barely audible. And then, as if in answer to her plea, the street seemed to change. The lights flickered out, leaving her in complete darkness. The cold night air seemed to press in on her, and the world became silent. Too silent. Emma stood, her eyes straining in the blackness, every sense heightened. And then from behind her came the softest sound, footsteps slow and deliberate. She turned around, her heart leaping in her chest, but there was nothing there. Just the endless stretch of the street. The footsteps grew louder as Emma's heartbeat quickened. "Stop!" she screamed, but the silence that followed was worse. The figure, her mother's face twisted, whispered, "You're part of me now." With everything inside her screaming to run, Emma took a step back, but her legs gave out once more. She fell to the ground, unable to move, unable to breathe. The figure was too close now, its presence suffocating, its voice a soft whisper in her mind. "You belong to me," it murmured, its cold breath brushing against her skin. "Forever." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the ground, knowing that escape was impossible. The street, the figure, the house, it was all part of a trap she couldn't get out of. Her mind flashed back to the first time she had entered the house, the feeling of dread, the whispers in the dark. It had all led to this moment. The figure reached down, its cold fingers brushing against her cheek, and Emma closed her eyes, ready to give in. But then she felt it. A surge of defiance. Her mother's love, her own will to survive. She was not just a victim of the house. She was stronger than this. With one final cry of strength, Emma pushed the figure away, her body filled with an energy she hadn't known she possessed. The house trembled as the figure shrieked in rage, but Emma was free. She could finally leave. She stepped forward, and the darkness receded. Emma stood in the doorway, her body trembling. She had escaped, but the weight of what she had faced pressed down on her. The house was behind her, but the memories, the terror, lingered. She took a deep breath, but the air felt thick. She wasn't sure if she was truly free. The town was silent, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. The streets, once familiar, now seemed foreign, empty. The terror that had been locked in the house was slowly creeping into her reality, reminding her she couldn't escape. Emma tried to return to her life, but things were never the same. Her reflection in the mirror seemed unfamiliar, like a stranger stared back at her. The horrors she had experienced twisted her, leaving a part of her broken. The past still haunted her. At night, Emma would hear the scraping again, soft and insistent, like a whisper from the dark. The house, though miles away, still had its hold on her. She would never truly be free. The figure, the house, had followed her into her mind, and it would never let go. Emma lay awake in the dark, her breath shallow. She had won, yet the victory felt hollow. The fear wasn't over, it had only changed forms. It was with her now, inside her, waiting to resurface. The nightmare had become her reality. Emma sat in the corner of her room, the whispers louder now. They called to her, a soft, familiar voice that chilled her to the core. "You can't run," it said. The walls seemed to close in on her as the house's presence reasserted itself. She tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. Every escape was blocked, every exit closed. The house had claimed her. The figure's face appeared in the shadows, its smile twisted and wide, and it whispered, "Welcome home." The darkness in the room shifted, forming into something more solid, something human. Emma's heart raced as she saw the familiar figure of her mother, twisted and hollow, standing before her. It whispered, "I'm always here." Emma felt the walls close in, her mind slipping away. The house, the figure, it was all consuming. She couldn't escape, not in her mind, not in her soul. She was part of it now. She had always been part of it. The last echo of her scream was swallowed by the house. Emma was no more. There was only the darkness, waiting for the next soul to claim. The figure stood in the doorway, its smile never fading. The house had won.